No announcements out there? All right.
Lynn,
Yes.
I could jump in real quick. I put out an email today congratulating Dalton Sizemore for winning the Gary Walker Award this year. So if you get a chance to see Dalton, I know virtually somewhere, hopefully pat him on the back. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ray. That's awesome. Okay, so our speaker today is Bob Cherry, and some of you may remember him from the biology department. He was probably roaming the halls of Rankin for some time, or occasionally for some time. And so many of us know Bob because he has most recently worked in our section of the Blue Ridge Parkway. And so let me give you an official introduction. Bob attended the University of Illinois at Chicago for a couple years and then moved to the Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, which I hear is really beautiful. And so he graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Forestry and specializing in resource management in 1979. And then he started working for the National Park Service as an interpreter at Lincoln Home National Historic Site. So I guess he's a Lincoln expert. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. And then he was able to work for the Park Service and move around quite a bit from Boston, Corpus Christi, Texas, Deer Lodge, Montana, Whiskeytown, California. That sounds exciting. And then Boone, which of course we know is the most wonderful place in the world. And so his title, Resource Management Specialist for the Highlands District of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Many of us have worked with him through Audubon Society, or because he helped us do research associated with the Parkway, or because he had internships with our students. But he also worked with Dr. Robert Creed and got a master's degree at App State, which he completed in 2001. And so he's also a stream ecologist. But one of the most wonderful things about Bob is that he has a great breadth of knowledge in natural history and has worked with so many different critters. And so I'm really excited to welcome him today to talk to us about sort of everything about his career and all the kind of cool projects he got to work on. So thank you very much for joining us today, Bob.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. Let me start my program. Okay, so hopefully that's working. I was going to start off a little bit of the history of how I got here and then get into a little bit of how to get a job like this, and hopefully some hints that will help some of you along. I think some of the information I must have sent Lynn was old with my biography. I haven't done a resume for quite a while. So officially when I retired, I was the Parks Wildlife Biologist and had been that for 10 years or so. I started off though, as Lynn said, at Lincoln Home, and I didn't know what I was doing. You know, there's really no internet to do research on, and I guess I was too lazy to go to the counseling offices at the university. So I kind of stumbled along and got offered a job at Lincoln Home, and I was an interpretive ranger. So I don't know if anybody's been to Lincoln Home, but it's a 4-block area around the house itself. And there's historic homes and structures, and it's kind of a neat place that, you know, everybody likes Lincoln, or most everybody likes Lincoln, and they come from all around the world. So you got to really meet some neat people. But I would do the interpretive programs like you see here, school programs, that sort of thing. And one of the things I did while I was there was I did get my emergency medical technician. So that did help me along the way. After a couple of years, I started looking for a new job, and I realized pretty quickly that I was not qualified for much at all. When I was hired, I had no experience. I was hired partially because I had no experience. They kept hiring well-qualified people, and those guys would get hired right away to someplace else pretty quickly. And so in part, they hired me because I was straight out of college, had no experience, and they knew I'd stick around for a while. So while I was there, I of course wanted to go to Yellowstone and Grand Canyon and those places. And I learned pretty quickly that it's very competitive. People out there had law enforcement commissions. This is back when, nowadays, if you're law enforcement, that's all you do. And if you're not law enforcement, you don't do law enforcement at all. Back when I started in 1979, you could do a little bit of both. And so I started looking around for a place to get law enforcement experience, and I got hired at Boston National Historical Park. So it wasn't quite Yellowstone, sort of a little bit like the Grand Canyon, I guess, but not quite what I was looking for. But it was a good experience. I got a lot of training there. I did get my law enforcement commission. I got promoted to a supervisory position. So I spent 3 years there, headed down to Padre Island National Seashore as a law enforcement ranger. And, it was busy during the summer months, but then the rest of the year is pretty quiet. So I got involved in firefighting. We had a lot of grassland fires. I did get sent out to California one time for a project fire. So I improved my skills a little bit there. I got involved in the sea turtle program, where they would raise the turtles from eggs and then release them on the beach, and helping out a little bit with the resource management program. So I started to develop my skills, and that got me a job up at Grand Coors Ranch up in Montana. And the nice thing with Grand Coors Ranch, I think we had 6 full-time employees. And so, everybody did everything. And so I was in charge of the law enforcement program, the firefighting, I did interpretation, I branded cows, I did, worked on the fences. I was a safety officer, tort claims officer, hazardous materials coordinator. So if you want to get some experience, go to a small park and they'll give you as many titles as you want to put on your resume. So it was a good experience, really a beautiful place. It was limited opportunities there. But I did get involved in firefighting and got sent off on more project fires, got more involved in that. And then that got me a job at Whiskeytown, which is Whiskeytown Shasta Trinity National Recreation Area. Whiskeytown is the National Park Service site. Shasta and Trinity are Forest Service. So I moved there, got a job. I got hired as an engine boss, crew boss. So I would take the park's engine or take a crew out to, Southern California, New Mexico, Montana. We went all over the West and fought fires, pretty much all summer and into the fall. Not quite as active as it is nowadays, but still pretty good. And then when we weren't doing firefighting, we would do resource management. So in the wintertime, we were working with the fisheries. We were doing rehab of some of the old lands, and again, kind of expanded my different skill set. And then that got me hired on the Blue Ridge Parkway. So when I started on the Parkway, I was the first district biologist hired. Before that, we had one biologist working out of headquarters, and she would call up the district rangers and ask about if they could do some program with plants or some study of the fisheries. And they would say, yes, we can, or no, we can't. But the park finally decided that really wasn't a great way to run the program. So I was an experiment. I came here in 1992, and I was a district biologist. And I think if it was the job that it is today, I never would have been hired. What helped me along was I had my law enforcement commission. I was a firefighter. I was an EMT. I had a lot of other skills, and the park really wasn't ready to, I think, fully dive into a biologist position. So I could be off counting my frogs or whatever, and if there was a law enforcement incident, I could put my gun on and go help them. So I was kind of a compromise, but evidently it worked out. We have 6 districts. Within 2 years, we filled all those with district biologist positions. And back then, we had a set distance on the Parkway. So my range was from the state line up in Virginia down to about Grandfather Mountain. And I did all the plant work, all the animals, agricultural leases, hazardous materials, environmental compliance, all that sort of stuff. And, you're kind of scattered doing that. So about 2005, they changed things around and gave us all park-wide duties. So we had Chris, who was a plant ecologist. So his job became taking care of the entire parkway and all the vegetation issues on the parkway. Tom Davis took care of the agricultural leases and bears, deer, elk, and hogs. Lillian got all the environmental compliance and integrated pest management. And then I think I got the best deal. I got all the aquatic resources, so all the fisheries and the streams and lakes. I got all the threatened and endangered species, and I got prescribed fire. So for about the last 15 years, I was working the entire parkway. And as most of you know, the parkway is pretty long. It's 470 miles long. So it's kind of a challenge to be able to do everything, the entire length of the parkway. Occasionally we would get seasonals or seasonals who work 3 to 6 months a year. We would get interns, we would get volunteers to help us along. But basically each one of us had our own program, and the way the money and funding was, we just did not reliably have helpers with us. So that always made it a challenge. You could start something one year and not know if you could continue it the next year. We've always been fighting too to make sure people know the parkway is more than just the motor road. So many people just think of the parkway as, you drive down the road and enjoy the views and you camp maybe and hike a trail. But we've really been trying to teach even park employees, regional employees, that the parkway is much more than just the road. I think we have now, with all the bats being endangered, or so many of them being endangered, I think we have 12 federally listed plants or animals. We have over 100 state listed animals and plants. We have imperiled ecosystems. So it's been interesting working on the parkway with all the different activities and different things of concern. So we can start off with birds. So I'm just going to go through some of the projects we've done, and some of the things are from the past and some are still ongoing. One of the things we've looked at, it's been kind of frustrating because it's really not moving along very quickly, but we have about 500 agricultural leases on the park, about 5,000 acres of agricultural land. Most of that's hayfield, where we grow cows and we grow hay. We lease the land out to local farmers, and they of course resist when we try to put changes on how the land is managed, because they want to grow their cows and they don't want to grow birds and butterflies and things. But we got to the point where we decided we really needed to try to manage some of these lands for the benefit of wildlife. So this is the one up at the Cone Cemetery. I'm sure many of you have been up there. The area in yellow where he's only supposed to mow it every 3rd year. And so that leaves up all the forbs where the butterflies might lay eggs or overwinter. But every 3 years, then he goes in there and he cuts down the pine trees and the locust trees that might be moving into the area. The green area, he can't mow until I think it's August 1st. What we're trying to do there is give the grassland birds a chance to nest. And, the concern, of course, is how do the birds know which side of that road to make their nest? They don't. So we're trying to give them a fighting chance. But, if we made the whole thing green, none of the leasees would want to take the land, and we'd have to maintain it ourselves, or it would grow up into forest. So we're hoping that leaving it will benefit the butterflies, the pollinators, and then also give the nesting birds a chance. So we've done this with probably 24 leases on the parkway with some success, I think, and some frustration. We've had monitoring avian productivity and survivorship stations on the parkway, map stations. So these are long-term monitoring sites. They want to do it for at least 5 years. I think we did each one for 6. We did one at Bass Lake from 1996 to 2001. And then we did one down at Richland Balsam, south of Asheville, from about 2010 to 2016, I think it was. So what you do is you set the nets up in the same location in the spring and the summer, and you see if birds are surviving their migration and coming back. And then you're also banding the nestlings as they fledge and seeing if the birds are producing. The concern was, is the decline in some of these birds because they're not producing babies, or because they're not surviving their migration. And so, us doing it gives us a little bit of information about the Parkway, but the main thing is that we were part of a network is by the Point Reyes Bird Observatory. And, they have map stations across the country, and I think probably around the world. And so, our part was just a small part of that big data set that they used. And it was a good way to get visitors involved. We would let people release the birds, and they could watch us band the birds and measure them and all that. So it was really a great way to get people attracted over to the table to see what we're up to, and then we could give them a nice little conservation message. We do have, of course, mammals on the Parkway. One of the things we're doing are wildlife studies. Tom Davis, who's our biologist up in Virginia, he's got cameras that he sets out. Some of it's just for general information about what animals are where, but then we've used them also to look at culverts and underpasses to see how animals are crossing under the Parkway without getting run over. We've used them for spotted skunk surveys with the state in Clemson. We've used them to look for predators in some of our wetlands that might be eating our endangered turtles. So we've used them for different things. It's a great tool. And it gives some cute pictures too. I don't know if anybody's on our Facebook page, but we have some nice pictures of bear cubs wallowing in the puddles and that sort of thing. So check that out sometime. We do Carolina Northern Flying Squirrel surveys. They're a federally listed subspecies. What we do is we have basically these bird houses that we set up at high elevations, and the squirrels are nocturnal. So we come out in the daytime, put a net over the opening where you see that one guy sticking his head out, and then start banging on the side of the box and poking them up from underneath with a knitting needle. And then they hop out into the net, and we put them into a holding bag, and then we put an ear tag on them, measure the foot, determine if they're female, if they're lactating or post-lactating or pregnant, if they're male, if they're scrotal. We confirm that they're a northern flying squirrel, not a southern flying squirrel. And this is another project that we're a small part of. We've got about 15 routes of 10 boxes on Parkway land. The state's got another 150 or so in the Southern Appalachians. And so we just send our data to them. They put it all together. And so the Wildlife Resource Commission biologist, Chris Kelly, is one that manages this, working with Sue Cameron with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's something we do for the Parkway, but it's also something that we do for the bigger picture. We just don't have enough land and enough animals to do our own. And so this works out well. Hopefully you're all aware of white nose syndrome. If not, it's a fungal disease. It's been affecting hibernating bats. The fungus likes the cool and damp conditions found in these caves. And so you've got caves, most of them are north of us, but some of these used to have like 1 million bats, and then white nose syndrome comes in and you lose 99% of your bats. The fungus kind of irritates the skin and wakes up the bats. They start flying in the winter when they should be sleeping and conserving their energy. And of course, there's no food to eat, and basically they starve to death. So we've seen about 8 different species impacted by white nose syndrome, and most of them are declining 95 to 99%. So even though we don't have the big caves here, we do see the effects. We started doing bat surveys around 2011. White nose syndrome came to Tennessee about that same time. So we just started about a year, maybe 2 years before white nose really reached this area. We started out with NC BAMP, which is North Carolina Bat Acoustic Monitoring Program. And basically we have driving routes on the Parkway where we stick a microphone on top of our vehicle, connect it to our laptop, and we record all the bat calls as we drive down the road at 20 miles an hour for 1 hour. We do those 3 times a summer. It's been a while trying to remember. 3 times a summer, and we passed that on to, I think, ASU. We hired Mike Osborne to do that last year. He hired Chloe to do it, and so if you have any questions, find Chloe and she can answer them all for you. Well, we did that with the state for about 5 years, and then the North American Bat Monitoring Program was created. And so it combines the 20-mile driving routes with stationary microphones too. So we continued doing the NC BAMP routes that we had been doing since 2011. And then each time we did one of those, we would set 3 microphones somewhere along the route in different habitat for 4 nights and collect bat calls from bats in different habitat and different weather conditions and all that. And again, this is another one where we enjoy having the data for the Parkway to know where we have rare species and important bat habitat. But the main thing is all the data then go to the North American Bat Monitoring Program. And if you have permission, you can get all the bat data from across the country. It's North America, so I guess Mexico and Canada too. But you can get all the data you want. And then ours should just be a subset of all that. So, it's one of those things where, again, we're just trying to be part of the bigger picture. We've been trying to get into mist netting, or I guess I've been trying to get into mist netting. You need a permit to do that. I don't have a permit, so I've been going out with Catherine Etchison with the Wildlife Resources Commission, and she'll go out and net bats occasionally, and we try to join her. So that's been an experience. Have a lot of fish. We have confirmed 93 species of freshwater fish in the park, which makes us number 6 in the National Park Service for freshwater fish species. So again, one of those things that people don't think of the Parkway as being this really big, diverse area, but we've got a lot of numbers like that I think are pretty impressive. So for some of this work, we've hired contractors. This is Ed Scott taking the picture. He was with Tennessee Valley Authority, and we hired him for, I think, 2 years to come out and sample different habitats along the Parkway. And so he came up with a lot of the species for us. We also work with the Wildlife Resource Commission. This is Ken Hodges, and I'm not sure, I think it's Kevin Heining maybe behind him. But they do a lot of trout surveys on the Parkway. So we use them for that, or maybe they use us for that. And then we also use them for special concerns. So one of the concerns we had, this is at Bass Lake out at Cone Park. All that land between the Manor House and Bass Lake was apple orchards back in the day. And we've done soil testing and found that the soils are contaminated with lead and arsenic. And so one of our concerns was that the sediment goes down into Bass Lake, and we were wondering how that would affect the bass and the bluegills down there. So they came out and sampled one day, and we sent off about a dozen fish to be sampled. And they did come back with elevated levels of lead and arsenic. So it's not enough that you can't eat them, but it's one of those like mercury where you're not supposed to eat more than a couple fish a month, or if you're pregnant or nursing, you're not supposed to have any of the fish at all. And then using a lot of the information from what they've done and going through all the archives, we created a fishery management plan that still hasn't been approved, but hopefully soon. But the big thing with this, we've been working with the state. They approached us about reintroducing native brook trout to some of our streams. And I don't know if you're all familiar with trout, but we have 3 trouts, 3 different trout here. We have rainbow and brown, which are not native to this area. They were brought in, from hatcheries. And then we have brook trout, which some of them are native, but a lot of them came from hatcheries originating up in New England. And so they've been doing a lot of genetic work, and others have been doing genetic work to determine where the native brook trout are. So they've identified a couple streams where we still have natives. They've identified a couple streams where they think we should have native, but they were probably wiped out, maybe during floods back in the day or from all the logging impacts. And then there's a couple streams where there's a rainbow trout. And so over the next few years, once our management team approves it, we're going to work with the Wildlife Resource Commission to reintroduce native southern brook trout to a few of these streams. So something that I wish hopefully I'll still be involved in it, even though I'm not employed there anymore. So we got a lot of reptiles and amphibians, of course. The one that gets most of the attention are bog turtles. We started, I don't know, probably 20 years ago, trapping bog turtles. And this is one of the traps that, they just walk into that opening there and the door opens up behind, or as they go through, and then closes behind them. And we come along later on and pull them out. So what that enabled us to do, though, was we got transmitters, and we stuck transmitters on a bunch of different turtles at a bunch of different sites. And then we followed them around. We'd go out, ideally we'd go out every day for a week. And then for the other 3 weeks during the month, we'd go out one day of each of those weeks. So that kind of gave us an idea of where they would go each day for the 1 week, and then where they would go just in the broader sense. We used a lot of ASU students. So this is one. This is Kate. So a lot of the times the turtles know we're coming, so they hide in the mud and the water. So we spent a lot of time like this, where you just reach into, the antenna is telling you that there's a turtle in that hole. And basically you just get down on your belly and just reach in and start feeling around till you'll feel something that feels like a turtle, and yank them out. So we found this, I think this is from 2005 to 2008. So each of those colors or shapes is one individual turtle. So you can each, see a lot of them have their own areas that they prefer. Which is going to be an example of one of them that kind of moved around. This is number 11. So we put a transmitter on in 2005, kind of hung around there in 2006 and 7. And then in 2008, you can see it moved up to the northwest, up towards the river, across the trail and all that. And then it turned around, came back to the wetland. But then the next week, it went about 600 meters downstream, and we tracked it there for a few days. And then we had about 7 inches of rain in like 4 days and couldn't get to the site. And when we did, he was gone. So I'm not sure what happened to that guy, but it was interesting getting one of them that, that we know they dispersed. We've had records of them being like 3-4 miles away from where they were originally caught. So, this is just one of those guys, for whatever reason, he decided it was time to go someplace else. We learned a lot about the hibernacula. So they spend about 6 months underground, from, about November 1st into April, almost May. And some of these sites, so like number 6 used this site. I think we found it there 7 out of the 8 years we found the turtle. We never found it in a different hibernacula. But these other guys also used it just one time each. We have sites that just used once by one turtle. Number 9 and 10 were male and female. They were here for 3 years in a row. And then 2 years, they moved about 10 feet away to another hole. And then the 6th year, they split up, and one went about 200 meters away, and the other one went back to this hole. So, we started to learn about what the turtles were doing and where they were going and who used what. We kept track of when they would go into hibernation, when they come back out again, who they were hibernating with. So we kind of learned a little bit about how much time they spend under there and when it's likely they'll come out. And we did find a lot of the turtles would hibernate with other turtles. There are a lot of good sites. There are a lot of holes in the ground that they could have been using, but there's something about the condition of these sites that they seem to really enjoy. We did publish 2 papers. Typically, we don't do a lot of writing. We're land managers that we're more out there kind of keeping an eye on our maintenance crew and making sure they're not digging up rare plant sites, putting in a water line or things like that. But I have this one Student Conservation Association intern who went to grad school and decided she wanted to write up some of the stuff she was involved in. So we did one on the bog turtles home range and one on their hibernation ecology. What we're doing now, a couple of years ago, I put in for some money to get eDNA surveys done. Now, if you're not familiar with that, it's environmental DNA. And basically it's as we go through life, we're sloughing off little pieces of ourselves into the environment. And so it's been used a lot with fish in rivers and streams. There's a lot of papers about bullfrogs in Europe, which are non-native over there. So they're trying to get rid of them. Use it for hellbenders around here. So we were thinking we could try it for bog turtles also. They're hard to find. And we've got about 60 sites where we found turtles, probably about 45 of them we haven't seen a turtle there for probably about 15 years or so. And we've tried trapping and we tried probing and all that sort of thing. And so we hired J.J. Apodaca out of Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy to come out, and they took water samples at each of these sites, kind of spread throughout the site. And then they looked for bog turtle DNA. His initial report is that they think they found bog turtles at almost half the sites. So, I mean, I think that's pretty amazing. I was hoping for, 2 or 3 sites. So we'll see if that continues to be what he thinks. But it would be a way for us to, if we know that we have bog turtles at a site, we could focus more attention and more money that is always limited. This is John Steely, who was in grad school at ASU the same time I was, one of Matt Rowe's students. He's now retired and really a great rattlesnake resource. We've hired him. We heard about maintenance people, using weed eaters on rattlesnakes that they would encounter as they were out working. And of course, we were not happy with that. So we got John to come out. I think we've had him out here probably 3-4 times at each time about 3 or 4 different locations, talking to the maintenance, interpretive staff, and law enforcement rangers and everybody else. So he brings the snake with and shows how to handle it safely. The goal is to not let the employee get hurt, but we also don't want the snake to get hurt. So he shows us how to do it safely. He talks about rattlesnakes and important snake business and all that sort of thing. And I think it's really helped. We've heard from a lot of maintenance guys who say that they don't chop up snakes anymore, which is kind of one of the big goals. And then John also did surveys of maternity sites and roosting sites for us, kind of gave us a better idea of what we have out there with them. We're involved in it started out as the North American Amphibian Monitoring Program. They've kind of gone out of business. It was a Fish and Wildlife program. I'm not sure why, but the state's doing it now as a calling amphibian survey program. So what we do is we go out 3 times, 3 different periods, 2 times each period in the winter and spring. And we have 10 sites along the Parkway that we just stop and listen for 5 minutes and identify the species of frogs that we hear. And then we give a rating of, if it's just one frog or a few frogs or a whole chorus of frogs. And again, that's another one that, we're just part of a statewide. I'm not sure if it's still North American wide, but at least statewide they're doing it. So, they can hopefully learn a little bit more using our data with all theirs. This is a route. You can see Price Lake there. So it's just driving down the Parkway a few nights and listening for frogs. We got money a few years ago to do wetland surveys, and it was really to focus on small mammals, plants, amphibians, and reptiles. But while we were out there, we always had a camera with us, so we'd always take pictures of these dragonflies and damselflies. And after a while, we had hundreds of photographs and decided we should do something with them. So we started to analyze them. And we were pretty amazed to come up with, I think we have 91 or 92 species now. To give you an idea of how many that is, the Smokies has, I think, 94. And, they have their all taxa biodiversity inventory going on, where they have specialists come out and they really focus on these and have money. So I'm pretty happy that basically, as doing this kind of on the side, we came up with almost as many species as the Smokies. I'm still hoping we'll find 2 or 3 more and catch them or pass them. We've done butterfly surveys in our agricultural leases. This kind of goes back to how we manage the leases, that we were concerned that we're growing cows well and maybe hay well, but not benefiting wildlife. And so we started looking at lands that were mowed once a year, lands that were grazed, and then lands that were kind of taken out of the system. And Lisa Smith, again, that same one who did the bog turtle papers, put one together for grassland diversity. We started out helping a couple guys doing aquatic insect surveys. And it was fascinating what they came up with. They went to all these little seeps and headwaters and found new species, new genera. They found species that were from Washington State or Michigan State, and so really some great stuff. But then, of course, when you put a black light out at night, you attract moths. So we started photographing all the moths while we were there. I think at one point I had 9,000 moth photos on my laptop. And one of the nice things with COVID was I had a couple people at a time to start looking at moth photographs, and we paid a couple experts to do some, and then we had other volunteers. So we've gone through all those photographs. We're entering them into the database now. We're up over 600 species. This is a moth bucket that we would also use, but we have more than 600 species of moths. We're expecting somewhere around 1,200 to 1,500 to be in the park. So it's really one of those really huge diverse groups. So when we were doing the wetland surveys, trying to catch fish, we'd catch a lot of crayfish. And this is one of the ones we found in one of our wetlands. It's a burrowing crayfish, and we collected lots and had jars full of crayfish. In 2015, I think we hired Dr. Gangloff to do a survey of the park and write up a report of what we had. This is Dan Mason and Susie Getta, I think it is. And they came out and did surveys on the park. And I don't know if Mike wrote it up or if they wrote it up, but they gave us a nice report of crayfish diversity and found some non-natives and some rare species too. We've been doing a lot of work in our wetlands trying to restore hydrology. We've got ditches that we're trying to fill in. The problem is some of them are bog turtle sites. And so we don't want to fill in this huge ditch and bury all the turtles. So we're trying to do like 10 feet at a time and, look for turtles and move them out if they're there, and then fill it up with dirt and then come back and do some more. We did get money next year to try to find buried drainage tile in some of these culverts. We found memos in the park files from the 70s where we gave permission to agricultural leaseholders to put ditches or put drainage tile in our wetlands in the agricultural leases. So we're trying to go back now and find where those tiles are and either destroy them or fill them up or block them off or do something like that. So trying to get some of the hydrology back where it was. Removing a lot of non-natives like multiflora rose and things like that. And then we're also taking out some of the woody vegetation. Some of these are bog turtle sites that they need sunshine for nesting and basking. And some of them are just closing in completely with alders and willows and other things. So we're opening up some of the areas to benefit the bog turtles. This is one of the ACE crews, American Conservation Experience. And then we've done a lot of stream bank restoration, where these were just vertical stream banks that, were eroding away and big pieces would slough off every time we had a high rain. So basically we just sloped them all back. And I was really pleased overall with how they looked. And then we fenced, I don't know how many miles of streams to keep the cows out of the riparian area and just have a watering access. And then we're trying to do prescribed fire. The problem with prescribed fire program is if you don't have money, you can't burn. And if you don't burn, they won't give you money. So we're kind of tagging along now with the Forest Service. They have some areas down between Old Fort and Mount Mitchell. They have 3 different places that are about 1,000 to 1,500 acres that they burn. And it used to be they would burn up to the park boundary. We didn't have permission to do a prescribed fire, so we would tell them, they had to put a control line at the boundary. Well, now we are allowed to do it, and so they can burn up to the Parkway. So whenever they do their burns, we get about 80 acres burned for free. We can take credit for that, and then that gets us some funding to do a little bit more the next year. We're working with the Nature Conservancy to try to burn one of our bog turtle sites to get rid of the thatch. So hopefully that will continue even after I'm gone. So I was going to finish up with how to get a job, I guess, with the Park Service. As I said, I stumbled into it. I would not have been hired with the skills I had 28 years ago for this position. Things have changed quite a bit. It used to be if you had a master's degree, you really stood out. You were, pretty hot stuff. And nowadays, if you don't have a master's, you really stand out, unfortunately, for the other reason that it's kind of being expected more and more that you've got at least a master's, and now even a PhD is, is the way to get attention. This slide is just to remind people that there's other ways to get jobs in national parks or forests. There are biologists out there, but there's also all these other jobs out there too. Maintenance is probably the biggest number of people. Sometimes they can be used to get a foot in the door. Amber Benfield, who was a recent ASU student and a volunteer with me last year, she got hired by our maintenance staff this last year, and she's enjoying it and hoping they'll get her, get her foot in the door and get her some maybe more interesting jobs. There's a lot of other agencies besides the National Park Service, and all these guys, they have the biology jobs, hydrologist jobs, plant ecologists, all sorts of things. They're not as desirable or as competitive as the National Park Service is. But a lot of these, there's Forest Service land surrounding Yellowstone National Park, and Bureau of Land Management land surrounding a lot of these beautiful desert areas out west. So you can get the same kind of job. You can become a federal employee and get your status, which allows you to apply for other jobs. And it's not as competitive. So I would encourage you to consider these other agencies. Even if you don't want to work for the Corps of Engineers and be a beaver, then do it for your first job and then try to get something else. But they are easier to get into. Hopefully everybody knows about USA jobs. Any federal job should be listed on here. If somebody would call me up and ask me about a job, this is where I would send them, because we don't do anything in the park separate from what would be on here. One of the things to remember is that a lot of the jobs, excuse me, we hire. So for summer jobs, we're hiring them in January and February. I would get a lot of students call me up in April or May asking for a job for the summer if we had anything. And I say, yeah, we do, but we filled them already. So you really need to be thinking now if you want a job in this summer with a federal agency. I looked on here today, and there are jobs available. I'm not sure if it's as many. And then last year with COVID, we didn't hire a lot of our positions until about 3 months after normal. So I'm not sure how this year is going to go. But the main thing, unless you've worked for the federal government before, you want to look in this little box here that says open to the public. A lot of jobs you have to be a federal employee to even apply for. And so you want to make sure you're looking for the jobs that are open to the public. And then, I'm not going to tell you guys how to do a search on these. You guys know more about this than I do, but if you just type in biological technician, you'll get the jobs, you'll get the listing, and they'll tell you where it is. This one's up at Acadia National Park up in Maine. They'll tell you when it starts, how much it pays. And then this is where all those forms are about what paperwork you need, whether you qualify. Some jobs you need a combination of experience or education. GS5, everything's by a grade scale. GS5 is a bachelor's degree, but you could be a GS4 and years of experience and qualify. So you got to really read all that stuff and make sure that you send in all the forms they want, or else they'll just reject you. There's a lot of non-federal jobs too. I work with a lot of the Wildlife Resource Commission people, and pretty much all the permanent employees have a technician, and the technicians work for 11 months out of the year. And it's great experience. A lot of them move on to some really good things, and some of them stay in the technician job for long periods of time. So, don't forget about the states. Some of the counties, like Catawba County, has a naturalist program. Some of the bigger cities, nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, they have a lot of biologists that they work with. So there's a lot of jobs with them, and pretty much anybody who does that kind of work, they have seasonal positions. The summers are usually the busy time for everybody, so they do hire people just for the summer, and then they have, of course, permanent positions too. A friend of mine worked for the Yellowstone Association and loved it, and got to spend about a year out at Yellowstone, and just had a great time. It's not working for the federal government, but it's working in the park and doing that kind of work. Hopefully you've all heard about Student Conservation Association. There's AmeriCorps. There's American Conservation Experience. We use them on the Parkway. Some of those photographs were them. Usually they pay you enough so you don't starve to death. That's kind of seems to be their goal. They might give you housing, they'll give you a small stipend, but you can get some good experience. My only suggestion with them is, if you take a job with one of them, make sure you know what the job is. We had one SCA student who seemed like half the summer weed eating down at Bass Lake, until I complained to his supervisor about that, and then they found some more interesting things. But I've heard about people who basically just painted fences and things like that for the summer. So you want to be careful what kind of job you take. Or maybe that's fine. Maybe if you work at Yellowstone for the summer and you're painting fences, you're fine if you go backpacking on the weekend. So it's obviously it's your call. The Parkway does use volunteers. We do them mainly through Friends of the Blue Ridge Parkway. I meant to check on this, see if these guys are still here, but there used to be a Friends group at ASU. I haven't heard of them recently. I'm not sure if they're still around, but that's an option. Otherwise, the Friends group is still around. They're just not an ASU chapter. And then I used to get a lot of people calling me up asking for internships, and I always try to give them something. I know our law enforcement rangers use interns for trail work. There's different activities they have that they can use help with, volunteers with. So you can check with them too. There's also, there's concessions, there's contractors, there's cooperating associations. So again, if your goal is to go to the Grand Canyon and hike for the summer, or just, the spring or fall, whatever, kind of hot in the summertime, you can get a job with a concession. You bus tables or wash dishes or staff the hotel desk or whatever. But then your weekends, you can go backpacking and do that kind of stuff. So, if your goal is to get into some of these beautiful places, there's other ways to do it. Today was the first day I've been on this website, but I've had interns and people in the past tell me it's a great site. So if you don't know about it, it's the Texas A&M, it's covered on my screen, but I think it's Texas A&M Fisheries and Wildlife Job Board or something to that effect. But the link is down below. But they have jobs from across the country. And the people who have worked for me who have used this were just really impressed with this site. So check this one out at Texas A&M. So a few final thoughts to end up with. Your applications to impress people, and I'm always amazed at how sloppy some people are with their applications. I think part of that is because it's so easy now to cut and paste. When I started applying, I was typing everything. And I always had a limit. If I had 3 typos, I started over again, which would kill me at 1 o'clock in the morning. But There's really no excuse nowadays to have any typos. After you've read your resume for 30 times, you're probably going to just blur over some of this stuff. So make sure you get somebody else to read it too, and they'll catch mistakes that you may not catch. A lot of people don't put any effort into their resumes, it seems. They just slap everything in there, and then they leave it up to me to find out if I'm hiring them to do bird surveys, to look through this mess and try to find what birds have they ever done anything with. So you really want to be organized. And if you're applying for a bird job, put your bird stuff first. Don't put it on the third page or third paragraph even. Put it there at the start so that I can find it real easy. It's amazing how many people who have had one herpetology class and they are like God's gift to herpetology. Hopefully we're not dumb when we're hiring people, but if somebody's going to be telling me that they're the best at something and they've had one class, that kind of really turns me off. So you don't want to be modest though, because you are competing for jobs, but at the same time, you don't want to lie about what you can accomplish, because I really think we can see through that. If you don't follow the directions and sign the forms and include all the paperwork, you're not going to get hired. So you really do want to make sure you read the announcement carefully. I've had cover letters with people basically saying, I'm excited to be applying for a job at Yellowstone National Park. And my thought is, well, then why did you send me your application? So, you want to make sure that you're applying for the job that you're applying for. And, don't get sloppy and just reuse everything. If you're applying for a bird job, move your herpetology skills down lower than your bird stuff, so that that we can see what skills, what surveys you've done and knowledge you have. I don't know how many references I've had who have been on sabbatical or they're backpacking in the Andes, and it's really up to, when people apply for the jobs, make sure that that person is going to be there by the phone number is correct, and that it's not somebody who you get so mad at because they never return your calls. Well, they'll probably never return my call either. So make sure you have references who will answer the call or call back, and find somebody who will say good things about you. I've had references who say, basically do not hire this person. I've had references that were their mother. They work in a family business and their mom's their boss. And if that's all you have, put her down, but don't put down somebody who sounds like they'd be a good reference unless you're sure that they will support you. It's just one of those, say everything you have to say, but then stop. Don't just drone on and on trying to impress us. I think a lot of times people who have fewer skills try to write longer resumes because they think length is going to make up for their lack of abilities. But again, it's irritating. Don't call every week. It's nice when somebody calls up and says, I applied, if there's anything else you need, let me know, and show enthusiasm, but otherwise it's annoying. Again, have somebody read it over. If you're trying to impress me with your resume and it's full of typos or grammar mistakes, my concern is if you're trying to impress me with that and that's how you do it, what's it going to be like when you have the job and you're not trying to impress me anymore? And then I think the last one I have is, if I call you up for an interview, and if it's not a good time, tell me and I'll call back, but don't just sleep through the interview. It's great to hear. I'm going to be spending 6 months or so with you. So it's nice to know that you're excited about the job and that you'll be a fun person, not just a skilled person to work with, but a fun person to work with too. So try to show some enthusiasm. If anybody, if you have any questions about things I haven't covered, or you want to talk about anything, here's my email. I can get in touch with you. I'm happy to look at resumes too. If anybody wants me to send me a resume to look at, I'm fine looking that over from a hiring official's perspective. So that's all I have. I don't know if there's any questions.
Yeah, Bob, I've got a question for you. Nice talk. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I heard that the Congress passed a bill to provide for deferred maintenance to the national park system that was quite substantial. Do you know anything more about that? Did it really come about? And if it did, what would that mean for this area?
So a lot of it, yeah. So there was an Outdoors American Recreation Act or something like that. It's supposed to be, the Park Service is supposed to have like a $12 billion backlog. And that's everything from restrooms falling apart to campgrounds falling apart to roads. It's really more facilities. I don't think it's going to help like the resource management programs or law enforcement or anything like that. But when I talked with our maintenance foreman a couple of weeks ago, he said he's just overwhelmed trying to get in all these different projects. So it's like repaving the Parkway. It's rebuilding. I don't know if it's new restrooms or rebuilding restrooms, but it's like at the Manor House, put a new roof on the Manor House, things like that. So it's going to be maintenance and facilities, not for staffing. I don't think. I know they're trying to get staffing because it's gone down pretty much every year, and they create new parks every year with fewer and fewer people. So that's definitely needed, but I don't know if that's included as part of that. So yeah, it's like for the next, 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. It's supposed to be for quite a while.
Hey, Bob, this is Ray. Thanks a lot for coming and for your talk. I want to ask you about, so, when you go up to the Moses Cone and hike, and a lot of people kind of notice all the cows, of course, and they probably have cussed them more than once about the damage they seem to do. I guess it's a historical, there's a Park Service mandate to kind of maintain the historical use of the land, that type thing. I'm just wondering how much controversy those kind of things are. I mean, are there people who just do not feel like that we should have these grazing lands in the park or in any park? But I'm just wondering what the discussions are about that. Thanks.
Yeah, there are, and even within the park. I was always surprised when we would try to fence out the riparian zones. I thought we were doing a good thing keeping the cows out of the streams and letting the vegetation grow up. Our landscape architects did not like it because they like those long distance views. And so as the trees grow up, you block the view beyond where the trees are. And so they're looking at it from that perspective. When the Parkway was created in 1935, one of the main goals was to preserve the cultural and historic scene. And also they don't want driving 470 miles through just a forest. They wanted where you turn the corner and you go from the forest to this long distance view, and then you turn the next corner and there's cows out there in the field. So they wanted the diversity. It was frustrating. I thought we could have done a better job. Some of the leases are great. Others, it's not their land, basically, I think is the feeling, and they overgraze it. They don't manage. They're supposed to mow it every year to reduce the non-native plants, and some of them are good and some aren't. But no, we're committed to having agricultural leases, and the way we do that is through leasing to local farmers, or else our maintenance staff would have to do it, and they can barely mow the Parkway.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
But you get people, as soon as the road shoulders get above 6 inches, people are calling the superintendent to complain about that. So I think people have every right. If you think the cows are creating erosion and mucking up the streams, you got as much right as everybody to send the superintendent an email and say, I noticed this problem, and what are you doing about it?
I had a question. I noticed you said that you had cameras, trail cameras up and Parkway cameras, and that you've done a lot of different surveys. What is the most unusual thing that you've seen as far as animals or plants that have been in the Parkway that you would not have expected? So I'm sure you've seen something probably.
Yeah, some of them are entertaining. There's this one really nice picture of a bobcat standing up on a rock wall with either a groundhog or a squirrel in his mouth. And it's just, kind of a majestic scene, with it standing there. We've had, with the video cameras, we've had a mouse shoot past and a weasel right after it. So there's things like that. We've also, and we found again, the spotted skunks. We're trying to survey for them. And we have found them using the cameras that we wouldn't otherwise know where they were. I don't want to. I would complain about them. I thought we spent too much money and too much time just taking pictures of cute little animals. But you put it on the Facebook page, and a cute little bear gets 10,000 likes, and you put some other picture on, it gets 1,000 likes. So people like seeing that, and I guess that's part of the game too. But the more we have them out, the more we get interesting things. So there's combinations of animals. There's bears with 4 cubs. There's all sorts of different things like that.
Bob, the Shea Tuberty,
Hey, Shay.
that little blurb you had in there about the northern flying squirrels, are they here locally or is that further south?
So they're above 4,500 feet. So we have southern down here, and then northerns are up above. And one of the concerns with climate change, as the southerns move up the mountains, they do have a pest that it annoys them basically, but it's worse for the northern flying squirrels, and it does inhibit their reproduction. And the concern is as the southerns move up into the northern territory, they're a little more aggressive. They're going to compete with the northerns, and they're also bringing disease with them that could inhibit the northerns. So yeah, unfortunately they're rodents, so they reproduce like rodents. So there's making lots of babies, but hopefully they can keep it up ahead of all that.
Yep. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Bob. So I was interested in the fields that you said you were leasing to people, that they had some restrictions in those green areas to basically preserve the wildlife. Can you tell us more about those restrictions? Let's say somebody has a field that they would like to kind of volunteer it for this kind of purpose. What would these restrictions be?
So it's kind of evolved over time. The one I showed you was one of the first ones that we did on the Parkway, and I think it's basically you cannot mow the field until August 1st. The theory being then the birds should fledge by mid-July or early July, and then if you chop up the nest, there's no babies or eggs inside of it. There was grumbling from the agricultural leases because they said the quality of the hay diminishes by that point. And so what we've worked out with them, we talked with Curtis Smalling at Audubon, North Carolina, and we came up with they can cut the hay whenever they want, but then they can't cut again for 6 weeks. And so that's kind of one of our our newer method, and I think something we're going to go with in the future. So you could cut it June 1st, but then you couldn't cut it again until July 15th. And again, hopefully the birds will figure out that, okay, June 1st, their nest got chopped up, but if they lay another nest real quickly, they've got 6 weeks to get their babies out. So.
And kind of piggybacking on that, since I already asked the question, and going back to the squirrels, would installing a squirrel box like that help the squirrel population?
So there's some areas where we think it helps them. Mainly it helps us. There are some places where there are not natural cavities, and they'll use like lightning strikes or a limb breaks off. They've even been found under the tree in the root system in a hole. They'll use woodpecker holes. But if you get into some areas where that's not available, the thought is that these would help them. But what they really do is they make it where we can find the squirrels. So when we go out and do the survey, you know, we're not going to be able to check a woodpecker hole that's 50 feet up the tree and all that. So it's as much for our benefit, probably more for our benefit than for the squirrels.
And for bats, from what I found out recently, that fungus grows in caves. With installing like a bat house, would that help the bat population?
No, because the bats that like to be in caves probably don't want to be in your bat house, or they'll be in there during the summertime, but not during the wintertime. They, you know, there's nothing for them to eat during the winter. And so they fatten up as much as they can, go into hibernation, and they're hoping that their fat reserves will get them through until the spring. So that's when we're concerned about them, and we're concerned they would be aroused. There are people looking at, you know, I mean, using fungicides in caves, which of course would kill any kind of fungus in there that's beneficial too. They're looking at using like ultraviolet light to, I think that's right, to kill the fungus. They're looking at applying some kind of solution to the sleeping bats with hopefully not waking them up. So they're looking at different ways of doing things. I think the biggest positive right now is that up in New England, it was first found in Western New York. In that area, they're finding little brown bats that had babies, survived, had babies. Now their babies have survived and they're having babies. There is some evidence that there's some genetic resistance building up. I just saw that a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, there are signs of hope, but you know, when you have 1 million bats and you're down to 1,000 bats or 10,000 bats, it takes a long time to get back up to 1 million bats again.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I had a question regarding what you said about a master's degree not quite standing out as much as it used to. Like, I'm actually in the position where I had to turn down an internship because it conflicted with my field work coming up this summer. And so I was wondering if you would say, when hiring somebody, if working in different labs and trying to get as much experience out of like, you know, other researchers as possible, would you say that that could potentially work as well as an internship or mean as much?
Yeah, I think so. You know, unless you've decided, you know, you only want to work with northern flying squirrels, you don't want to work with anything else for your entire life, I think the more experience you can get, the better. I've had students who love bats, and then the next thing I heard, she's out in Oregon doing spotted owl surveys, and she loves it, you know. So a lot of it is you have an opportunity, somebody's going to pay you to do something, and you need a job, and then you love what you're doing. I think when you're in college, when I did my master's, I was working, I had 2 kids and all that stuff. And basically I would go to ASU, take my class and run back to work. And I think I missed out on a lot of it because I was not interacting with other grad students that much. I would encourage you to, you know, if somebody else needs help carrying traps out to do something, go along with them and see what they're doing and get that experience. Especially undergrads, if they can find a graduate student to work with or a professor who needs help on a project. When I look at these applications, you guys all look alike. You know, everybody is 21, 22 years old. You've all had the same classes. You've all been to Costa Rica for a 3-week study class. Anything you can do to separate yourself from that is really important, I think. And I think it's just, you know, making yourself available and finding somebody who's doing something and needs help. And, you know, even if it's just lugging materials, I think that separates you. And obviously it depends on what job you're applying for, but I mean, I think the finding something that's different, that sets you apart is really the key.
Sweet. Okay. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
So Bob, I just want to say thank